Hey guys! All right, we're starting Unit 16 on reproduction in plants, so it's plants specifically. Now, when we're looking at this first section, section 16.1 Asexual Reproduction in plants, we need to cover what does it mean to have asexual reproduction. This ultimately means that it does not involve sex cells for fertilization, so only one parent is required. There's no fusion of gametes and no mixing of genetic information between two plants. So ultimately, plants can form new plants from a parent plant that are genetically identical to the parent and the offspring. So offspring and parent are genetically identical. Bacteria also can produce in this manner, and we are going to discuss the first type of asexual reproduction called binary fission, which you can see in this image. You have your bacterial cell, which is the parent cell. The cell contents are duplicated or doubled, and that genetic material with the DNA has been replicated. Then there is cell division by that binary fission, and the result is two genetically identical daughter cells to that parent cell. So they're identical to the parent cell. So that's our first type of asexual reproduction that we'll talk about. The next type is going to be what we call budding or tubers. You can also may hear this referred to as using bulbs that are going to form from the parent plant. So this is ultimately when we have the flower bud or bulb that's a short stem with leaves or the remains of leaves, which act as a food storage organ and eventually develop into a plant the following year. But what can happen is from this bulb can break off a bud. So this would be like the genetically identical offspring that buds from the bulb of the parent plant, so to speak. Okay, so a new plant will grow from that lateral bud that branches out from it. Potatoes act in this fashion, garlic, many things that are planted deep within the ground can asexually reproduce in this way. You also may see the phrase tubers when referring to potatoes because we can refer to them what the scientific explanation is, they form from swollen, fleshy underground stem buds that they form from, okay? And then the final type of asexual reproduction that we'll talk about for plants is a runner and a plantlet. So some plants grow side shoots called runners. So you can see in this depiction, the runner here from the top of the plant that contain tiny plantlets. And a good example of this would be the strawberry plant. So if you've ever grown strawberries, these will replicate themselves with runners, which is really nice, and they're perennial, which means they come back year after year to give us more strawberries. But they grow roots and develop into separate plants altogether from these runners, and they're genetically identical to the parent. Now, we do need to talk about the advantages and disadvantages of asexual reproduction. Here are the advantages. The population can be increased rapidly when conditions are right, which is great. You can exploit suitable environments very quickly. They're more time and energy efficient, and the reproduction is completed much faster than with sexual reproduction in plants. But there are some disadvantages. There's limited genetic variation in the population, so offspring are genetically identical to their parents. So if there is a genetic defect of any kind, that offspring is inheriting it. So that's something to keep in mind. The population is very vulnerable to changes in conditions. It may only be suited for one habitat. So when growing, especially plants, if they get some sort of disease because of your region or where you're growing them. I'm an avid gardener at my house with box gardening and square foot gardening. So this is something I'm always fighting different types of diseases or molds or plant spores. So a disadvantage of asexual reproduction is that they're just vulnerable to different things in their environment. And then disease is likely to affect the whole population because there is no genetic variation. So those are going to be your disadvantages. And when we're looking at crop plants, asexual reproduction can be advantageous is it means that a plant that has good characteristics like high yield, disease resistant, hardy, it can be made to reproduce asexually, and the entire crop will show the same characteristics. So there are some ways we can manipulate plants to be beneficial for us. But again, that takes lots of time and really just research and understanding what crop you're growing. So I hope all of you one day have the joy of having a garden. It's challenging but awesome. So yeah, that's the first section, 16.1 Asexual Reproduction in Plants. Head on over to your notes, get all these written down, and then take your CFU and finish up with your activities for the day. Good job, guys.